Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey, we'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. Each week, we'll come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters. Growth and progress, not perfection. All while developing positive habits for you to utilize in your life. To learn more, please visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of Positive Recovery MD podcast with Dr. Jason Powers, Julie DeNofa, and our guest, Dan Griffin, who is an internationally recognized author, thought leader, and expert on men's relationships and masculinity. Dan's work in life is dedicated to exploring and redefining what it means to be a man in the 21st century. Dan is dedicated to helping men be better men by understanding the impact of the man rules on their lives and finding the success in their personal lives they are striving for in their professional lives. Griffin's book, A Man's Way Through Relationship, is the first book written specifically to help men create healthy relationships while navigating the challenges of the man rules. Those ideas men internalize at a very young age about how to be real boys and real men. Dan was honored to serve as a senior fellow at the world-renowned leader for treating addiction and trauma, the Meadows, in 2015 through 2017. Dan grew up in the DC area and lives in Los Angeles with his wife, Nancy, and his daughter, Grace, and has been in long-term recovery from addiction since he graduated college in May of 1994. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Great. I can't wait for you to get into your story, but you and I have something in common. Central Recovery Press.
Very good.
Yes. Yeah, so who's your editor?
My editor was Dan.
Dan, he's great, man. Loves The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
So much. Can't wait to tell them that you're on my podcast so they can maybe send it out in their little blurb.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, they've been great. They're really good.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. I love my first book, A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, was published by Hazelden. So I've had the experience of both, which has been nice as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's another book for me to get. Well, why don't you tell our listeners about what it was like prior to May of 1994, what happened, and what it's like now?
Sure. I'd be more than happy to do that. So, what it was like. It's funny when I think about what it was like, it's changed for me through recovery. I had a story about what it was like, and I would tell you how awful it was and how horrible my family was and all of this. And there was a lot of pain in my family. There was a lot of alcoholism in my family. I was not the only alcoholic. There's been a long line of alcoholics, as is the case a lot of the times with us. Sometimes, we are the kind of aberration in the family tree, but other times there's, the direct lineage. And my father was a chronic alcoholic. I share that because growing up in an alcoholic home had such an impact on me. It had such an impact on my spirit. It had such an impact on how I felt about myself. I started drinking, though, when I was 14, and I got sober when I was 21. So it was a short run for me, and I'm grateful for that. I'm so grateful that, it was only 7 years. I can't believe it. I mean, it felt like an eternity in some ways. But I know that I was spared a lot of suffering, and I'm so grateful to God and to the fellowship and to just even my own willingness to be done, that I was done. But what it was like was I was a really emotional, scared kid. I was not a beacon of masculinity, as you would say sometimes about growing up. One of the challenges for me that was really formative for me was having been medically intervened on. I got medical intervention for growth. So I got the growth hormones when I was a kid, and I got shots of testosterone when I was a kid. And the way that came about was a pretty traumatic experience for me. And I didn't ever used to understand that as trauma. I didn't used to have a language for that, but it was a really powerful experience, and one that had happened in the space of an alcoholic home where my dad was, his alcoholism had gotten very bad at the time. And my mom was sick on her deathbed practically because they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. They later diagnosed her with a serious autoimmune disease. But that was part of her sickness, was that she was just in bed all the time. And my sister was at college, and I was alone, fending for myself as a kid. And, I was an emotional boy, and that's not a winning situation a lot of the time, is to be so emotional and to be somebody who was so sensitive. And for me, trying to navigate the world, I was small. It was interesting, right? Because from an elementary school, I was one of the most popular. I was one of the smartest. I was one of the most athletic. I kind of went in riding high. And then come 7th, 8th grade, when the other boys started getting taller, I was shorter and shorter, and then got to high school and I was still short. And I knew I wasn't growing. And I knew that, it was embarrassing. It was humiliating for me. I was the kid who got bullied. I went from being kind of on top of the heap to the bottom of the heap. And I was not a fighter. And, that just feeling outside and feeling lost and just feeling like so much less of a boy than these young men that I was around. And I never forget, I had, another kind of pivotal experience when I was in Catholic school, and we were supposed to take showers in the school. And I had not hit puberty, and I was not going to take a shower. And the coach was like, "Griffin, everybody takes a shower." And I was like, "I'm not," I was like, "Please, coach, please, can I just go?" And I was, I'd already changed and was ready to leave. And he's like, "Everybody takes a shower." And he had to have known, that I hadn't hit puberty. And he forced me to take a shower. And I took a shower in my underwear. And it was absolutely humiliating while the other guys looked around. And it was those kinds of experiences. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to function. And that was, when I took my first drink, it was like that stuff went away. When I took my first drink, I was 6 feet tall. I was handsome. I was outgoing. I could talk to girls because I was interested in girls, identify as heterosexual. And, that was important to me, to be able to figure out how I could just talk to them. And I had a drink. And the next thing you know, I'm talking to girls, and I'm the life of the party, and I'm snorting Tang, if you remember Tang.
Tang's drink?
Tang the drink, this dry drink, just the powder.
Powder?
Yeah,
what
just the
happened when
powder.
you snorted?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just being stupid.
Like snorting a pixie stick.
It's like snorting a pixie. Exactly. It was just dumb.
It's not like another name for a different drug. That was like...
No, that's Tang.
Orange coloring and sugar.
Orange coloring and sugar. Exactly. Right. The orange drink. And, and that's the kind of stuff I could do when I felt free. And so I discovered alcohol at the same time that people had told me that my dad was an alcoholic. I'd seen a guidance counselor in school, and he told me my dad was an alcoholic, but it didn't matter because what alcohol did for me was so powerful. It gave me something, and, the problem was once I came down, from drinking and I was sober again, I was that 5 foot, 5 foot tall freshman who was getting stuffed in the lockers and got put in the trash can and was bullied and made fun of. And, it was a miserable experience, but alcohol was an immediate friend to me. alcohol was the immediate experience where it was like I could forget those things for the most part, and I could just be different. And so I started drinking. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was a daily drinker. I was also a daily pot smoker. It was controlled, though, because I didn't want to be like my dad. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And so I tried, to control my drinking. I tried, from the moment I started drinking, in some ways, I was a controlled drinker. And it didn't matter, a 6-pack of Mickey's, Big Mouth, and a lot of pot was, a common experience for me. And I'd think, it was only a 6-pack, and, or sometimes it'd be more. And then it started becoming more, and it was beer, and you're not going to become an alcoholic only drinking beer. But then when I would drink beer, I would also drink hard liquor. And, by the time I got to college, I was definitely already drinking alcoholically, and how I felt about life was so different. I mean, I really felt like I was just an empty husk of a person until alcohol was in my body. And that was, the crux of it for me is that I needed alcohol in order to function. I needed alcohol and pot, and the pot made me paranoid, so paranoid. Oh my God. I mean, when I talk about the paranoia that I have, it matches what some people on meth used to get with their paranoia. As soon as I started smoking pot, people were trying to kill me. I mean, the people I was smoking pot with were trying to kill me. And, it was miserable. I mean, it was but I kept doing it
anyway. You're right.
I kept doing it, and I needed something to get out of my way. But, I didn't date. I really hated myself. There was a lot of self-loathing that came about in high school. The way my dad found out that I wasn't growing, the way that I actually ended up getting the shots of testosterone, the growth shots, was he and I had gotten into an argument, and he came in and I was carving F you, fuck you into my arm with a paperclip. And, it was one of those things where it was like, even an alcoholic is going to look at that and be like, what's going on with my son? Something's wrong here. This is not okay. And so I finally told him what was going on. And we went to a doctor, and the doctor was like, well, we can do these shots and they can help you to grow. But for me, I look back and I'm like grateful that happened. But at the time, it was just humiliating. It was a humiliating experience to go and be 15 and a half years old getting these shots, and they were for a 6-month duration. So they happened over my 16th birthday. And the last set of shots that I got, I drove myself to, because my dad was too drunk to drive me. I mean, and it wasn't lost on me, the paradox of driving myself to get shots that were helping me to grow to become a man. I mean, that without them, I wouldn't be a man. And so that's how I've done the work that I've done, is that I had this background conversation and story about not being a man, not being enough of a man. But I also had awareness of masculinity that was, pretty interesting. And in college, that's what happened is, it wasn't a real special event that got me sober. But I was taking classes, and it started with me going to, the guy said, a teacher said, you need to go to a religious organization. And I knew that Al-Anon happened in churches. And so I went to an Al-Anon meeting. And from that Al-Anon meeting, I went, and I happened to have a friend there at the same time. And we started talking. And then there was a guy on campus, and he was giving a lecture about growing up in alcoholic families. And I went to that lecture, and we were running behind. And I was like, I knew how many kids were growing up in alcoholic families. So I thought the place was going to be packed. And we got there late, and there was one other person there. And the guy gives the talk, and, it hit me square between the eyes. And from that, we started a group on campus, a group for children of alcoholics. And I was there for 1 or 2 groups. And I was, joking about my drinking and talking about it and just really unabashedly, going on about my own exploits. And he just looked at me, the guy, Randy, looked at me and he was like, I think you've got it. And he smiled. And I was like, got what? He said, I think you're an alcoholic. You sound like an alcoholic. And he could have called me a murderer. To have him come out and say that to me was just devastating to me. And then for the next 6 months or so, I tried to prove I wasn't an alcoholic. I did the old drinking have 3 drinks, and they never specified how big the drinks had to be, so I'd have these big tumblers that I was drinking, or they never said I couldn't smoke pot while I was drinking, and the bottom line is all I was doing was proving I needed something in order to function. I needed something in order to be okay. And I quit for 30 days. And to celebrate quitting for 30 days, I got drunk, So, it was like the signs were there. I went to him and I stayed in that group the whole time and I trusted him. And when it came down to it, I literally was at a graduation party we were hosting at our place. And I did some really crazy things. There was this process where it was like the pieces came together enough where I was like, I think I'm done. I think I'm done. And my friend and his girlfriend sat me down and they said, we know you've been trying to quit drinking. We think you've got a problem. And that was a gift. That was a gift to me. And that started the process of my recovery. And my path has been a 12-step path. I am incredibly grateful for that. I've been sober now for 26 years. And the whole process of recovery has been in parallel with becoming a man, a transformed man, a grown-up, mature man. They talk about how those steps, the working certain steps separates the men from the boys or the adults from the children. But, from my perspective, it's for the men from the boys. And this whole idea of emotional sobriety enables me to be a mature man. And from almost the time that I was sober, I started looking at myself as a man differently because of recovery. I walked into my first meeting of recovery and a man tried to hug me. And I was just like, whoa, what is this about? How is this the experience of men? Because that was not my experience of men. And then I heard men talking about their feelings, and I heard men asking for help, and I heard men, mentoring each other and being there for one another. I heard men telling each other they loved each other. Where, in what culture is this happening? And it wasn't lost on me that this was men doing this. Like, this was how men were interacting in this subculture that was just so fascinating to me. So I ended up doing my master's research on it. I wrote some books on it, but it's been so much my own personal experience. I'm married for 17 years. I've got a daughter, and all of those experiences have been me learning with help from other men, always with help from other men and women, how to be a man in this situation, how to be a man that is responsible, how to be a man that is conscious, how to be a man who is emotionally aware, and how do you parent as a father when you were fathered, by an alcoholic, temperamental father who was abusive? How do you do that differently? I couldn't do that differently by myself. There was no way. I needed help. And yet to be surrounded by men who are willing to talk about that and men who are willing to support me in that has been miraculous. Has been absolutely. Griff is one of the men that I am so grateful for having, in my life as somebody that I can rely on, that, I can take whatever's happening in my life, I can take to this group of men. And it's such a gift to have that opportunity. and to discover, what's the man that I want to be? What kind of man do I want to be? What kind of father do I want to be? What kind of husband do I want to be? And to have the ability and the opportunity to become that person with help from those around me, and walk that path, and to deal with the wreckage of my past, to deal with whether it was the wreckage I had caused or the wreckage that had happened to me as a child, the stuff that I thought I was done with, but was clearly impacting me as an adult, right? There's a great line from the movie Magnolia that says, you may be through with the past, but the past isn't through with you. And I had to learn how to navigate my past in a way, and that's kind of goes back full circle to how I started this. I used to think my father was evil. I today know that my father was sick. I used to think that my father was a horrible person. I today know that he was a very damaged person himself, and he did the best that he could. And I think it's really important when we say they did the best they could, that there's a lot of work that I've done to get to the point where I say he did the best they could. Sometimes well-meaning therapists try to get somebody to say that, but they're not ready. They shouldn't say it yet, because I needed to grieve. I needed to rage. I needed to really embrace and look at all the ways that I had been harmed and hurt, and the hurt that I was carrying with me, all of that, to get to the place where I can have genuine compassion for my father, where I genuinely feel sad for all that he lost. He drank himself to death at the age of 54. I mean, that was so sad for me. He gave me so many gifts in being the father and being the man that he was, even if those gifts were what not to do, even if those gifts were who I don't want to be, and even if those gifts were from his loss and from what he didn't achieve. But I look back to my past, and my past has been rewritten through the power of recovery, through the miracles of recovery. I have a different past than I used to. And it's a past that doesn't terrify me. And it's a past that's I'm not a victim to that past. And that's a freedom that I got, from recovery. That's a freedom that I got from doing the program of action that's laid, out in the literature and in the ways that we're invited to do that. And as a man, I have really sought to find a way to be a more conscious man on a daily basis. That's really what my books are about. That's really what it's all about, is how can I be a more conscious man? And for some of us, we don't know that we're living by these rules, these man rules. We don't know that we're living in a way that is being defined for us when we were kids, or these rules that we follow. Don't cry, don't ask for help, don't be vulnerable, don't share feelings other than anger, use sex as a form of intimacy, be a protector, be a provider. There's so many of these rules, and they're not good or bad rules, but if we don't see them, they have a really powerful impact on who we are. They have a really powerful impact on how we live our lives. And even men in recovery, I see how many of us struggle with the conditioning that we have as men, the stories that we have about how we have to be as men in our relationships and in intimacy and in the emotional moments of our lives. And, my whole thing is, let's just make it more conscious. Let's be more conscious about it. And one of my sayings is, it's not about doing it perfectly. It's about doing it consciously. And just being a more conscious man or conscious woman, that's how we move into a greater authenticity and a greater way of being. And that enables me to be more honest and vulnerable in how I show up. And so, that's a roundabout way of talking about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I mean, I am transformed, and I am so grateful to be in recovery. I feel like it's one of the greatest gifts that has been given to me. No, it's not one of the greatest gifts. It is the greatest gift that's been given to me, because without it, I wouldn't have all these other gifts that I have. I love being a father. I love being a husband. I love, the work that I get to do. But it's all because of sobriety, and it's all because I've been given this opportunity, and meeting people like you and being able to do this. It's all because of recovery. And at 26 years, I feel like I'm as blessed and committed as I've ever been. And that's a gift.
Thank you so much. I got to tell you, when I first asked you what it was like, and you said, what it was like is different now than it was before, I had this epiphany. I mean, you spelled it out so well, Julia. I think this guy needs his own podcast. But you said it so eloquently, when it's like therapists might try to rush somebody into compassion, into understanding, into experiencing forgiveness, not just granting it, but getting to the place where you actually say and mean the words. They did the best they could. They were sick. And not a rationalization. It's not dismissive of what he did to you. I love how you said that you had to process your grief. You had to rage. I mean, a spiritual transformation is full of that type of energy. It's full of acting out sometimes and being angry and raging and then grieving. And so many times people that go through early recovery are having these transformative experiences, and they're in treatment with us. And one of my frustrations is managed care will say, put this person on a mood stabilizer because of these symptoms, and they're not there on the ground. Or this person has blah, blah, blah disease. Well, they might. More often, these are the types of things you don't want to just apply pressure until the bleeding stops, because at the end is beautiful transformation. Yeah, I mean, I swear you said it better, more eloquently than I could have and than I've ever heard. I mean, really, thank you so much. I was lost in so many. I mean, Julie, I could see your face too. I mean, that was great. Do you put on like weekends? Do you sort of help people get to these places?
I've done retreats. I do retreats for men, and I've done retreats for professionals, and it's the professional retreats that have been the most powerful sometimes. Well, I shouldn't say the most powerful, because I love doing the retreats for men as much as I love doing the retreats for the professionals. But, when professionals come to me and we go through this process, and they're looking at gender, and they're looking at trauma, and they're looking at relationships, and we have this conversation, it's really powerful, because, what I say is, we are a traumatized field working with traumatized individuals, sending them to traumatized communities. I mean, trauma is an essential component of our lives and of the lives of the people with whom we work. And so many people in the field have their own trauma and have those experiences. So, when I do the weekends and I do the workshops and the retreats, I try to make it very personal. And I try to encourage people to go to places, that maybe they haven't gone, or they haven't gone in a while. I tell you, it's incredibly moving and incredibly exhausting.
Yes, it is.
And it's a gift to be able to touch people in that way.
So what do you do on a daily basis? How do you pay the bills?
Well, there's a lot of different things. I mean, I'm doing some writing. Well, the writing doesn't pay the bills right now. I'm doing some more writing. I just finished a book with a good friend of mine, Dr. Alan Berger. Somebody, if you haven't had him on your podcast, I highly recommend him.
Introduce him. I want him on.
I will absolutely introduce you. He's a great guy, but we wrote a book called What Men Would Tell You If We Weren't Too Busy Watching TV. It's a book for women, and we've written it to women about the man rules, but about how can women find a different perspective on the men in their lives, and how can you see what men are experiencing from a different place, a more compassionate place, a more honest place. And, we kind of take it on the Mars and Venus paradigm and are offering something a little bit different. So that's what we're doing with that book. I do trainings for professionals. I work with programs. We'll do deep dive work with programs about how to really redesign and transform their services for men. Because I just fundamentally believe if we're not looking at the way that we're serving men and women and looking at that perspective, that lens of masculinity and femininity, we're missing an opportunity on how we can support the people who are coming into services. So I do that. And then I've co-authored a curriculum with Stephanie Covington, another person who you could have on. She's been the pioneer for women's treatment. And I co-authored the curriculum Helping Men Recover with her. And I train professionals and programs on how to implement that curriculum into their programs and that sort of thing. So lots of different things that I do on a day-to-day basis. I'm trying to get back to two other books that I've been working on. One is called Amazing Dads, and it's a book. It's the first, as far as I know, trauma-informed book for fathers. And then the other one is called The Man Rules, because people have been, urging me for years to actually write a book called The Man Rules, and that really digs into that. So those two books are on the burner right now, and I'm hoping for completion this year.
Awesome. I can't wait to read them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely. I was thinking the same thing when you brought up that the book was in line with the Venus and Mars, because that's exactly where my mind went. And, while a lot of kind of the topics that you talked about in terms of trauma resolution and trauma work and the specificity around masculinity and femininity and all that, there's some really kind of fun things that you do in your off time too. What I understand is that you are a member of an all parents band. So I'm dying to know what instrument you play.
I play guitar and I sing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Dr. Powers plays drums.
Oh, nice. All right. We'll have to start another band too.
That's right.
We'll have to
Podcast Jam.
Yeah, Podcast Jam. There you go, man. Yeah. They have a friend of mine. They have special technology so that they can do their band practice on Zoom or a Zoom-like platform, but they can do it simultaneously, so they can play and they can hear each other.
Wow.
And it's not cutting out the way that Zoom does. So wow. He's been doing that. So we haven't done that. We've played a couple of times during the pandemic. We got together, social distanced and masked, and practiced our songs and played, and it was great. I love it. It's a real joy to get together and play music and just lose yourself in the songs.
In the flow. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me ask you, what is your favorite sound?
Ooh, I would say bells in the wind, like those
wind chimes,
Oh,
yeah,
but lightly ringing wind chimes as the wind is blowing too.
And what's your least favorite sound?
Somebody screaming.
What's your favorite word?
First word came to my mind, onomatopoeia.
Yeah, that should be an onomatopoeia. What's your least favorite word?
Trash.
What turns you on?
Really good, open, honest, vulnerable conversation.
And what turns you off?
Mean people.
And if you could do one vocation other than what you're doing, what do you think you would have loved to have a stab at?
Well, probably an actor or a musician.
Okay, cool. And what vocation would you loathe doing if you had to do the rest of your life?
Probably an accountant or a scientist, or like a scientist who doesn't really get to experiment, but like is stuck in like a dead end sort of, job that's going nowhere.
Like a scientist who's in charge of the accounting.
Yeah, exactly.
For all the other cool scientists in the field.
Yeah.
Okay. So assuming there's a God, when you die, what would you like to hear from God?
Well done.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
I'll turn it over to Jules.
Thanks. We are going to be taking a look at our daily positive intervention. And each of our daily positive interventions starts with a quote. So I'm going to read one by William Henry Channing. to live content with small means, to seek elegance rather than luxury, and refinement rather than fashion, to be worthy, not respectable, and wealthy, not rich, to listen to stars and birds, babes and sages with open heart, to study hard, to think quietly, act frankly, talk gently, await occasions, hurry never, in a word, to let the spiritual, unbidden, and unconscious grow up through the common. This is my symphony. So I think that's a beautiful quote for two musicians today on this podcast and all of those that are listening to us. It really is life that is a symphony that brings such joy to so many people. Our positive intervention is slow down, take the time today to breathe and relax. This is not a suggestion, it is a lifesaver. Running in the rat race increases stress and makes it harder to eat well, and chronic stress is the biggest killer in America. Americans work more and take less vacation time than ever before. As a society, Americans also experience greater medical concerns, such as higher rates of depression, anxiety, and heart disease. Too much fat in a diet interferes with the brain's ability to function optimally, and high sugar ultimately makes one sluggish and can even shorten one's lifespan. So for today's positive intervention, and I know Dan's been working on it today, he was to take at least 3 10-minute breaks during the day to sit in silence. He was asked to consume less caffeine and fat and to avoid processed sugar all day. We asked that he try to get at least 7 hours of sleep tonight by lying down an hour earlier than normal. Maybe not watch TV. We weren't asking him to journal on anything, and this is all stuff that he's going to be doing later tonight, but just to slow down and be. So, Dan, I'd like to check in with you and see kind of where you've been today on today's positive intervention.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I mean, I love that quote. I haven't come across that quote before, or the gentleman. So it was really cool to read that quote and how much that applies to me today. So that was wonderful. And then the actual practice is relatively easy for me. I have a strong meditation practice where I start my day with 20 minutes of meditation. So I did that piece. I've done another 10 minutes, 5, almost 10 minutes for a second time. And then I'll do one more, 10-minute stretch. I don't drink caffeine, so that's easy for me. And I don't do processed sugar other than Saturdays. That's my day off. So that's also easy for me. I've talked to my wife, and we're going to listen to our Obama book instead of watching TV this evening. And, that's part of the practice that I got from that reading.
So I have 2 questions about that. The first one is, how does that work for you on Saturdays? Like, if that's your day off and you're able to eat sugar on Saturdays, like, I think I'd go nuts. Yeah,
I don't. I used to go off the rails, and occasionally I might, if it's a particular day, I might go a little bit more off the rails, but for the most part, I just enjoy a couple of handfuls of dark chocolate covered almonds. And that's about it. I allow myself maybe a ginger brew, but sugar and caffeine, they're like cocaine for me. I don't like the cost that I pay from using those.
Gotcha. And the other thing really wasn't a question. It was just a statement. I love how you brought your wife into the positive intervention and incorporated her, both of you not watching TV, and you're going to listen to the audiobook together. So that's pretty amazing. I love that.
Thank you.
Dr. P, did you take any 10-minute breaks this day?
Yeah, I did it yesterday, and I did try to get 7 hours of sleep, but that's not under my control, but I tried, and I put away the iPad. I read a little bit, but I got to tell you, the stopping for 10 minutes is tough. I also meditate in the morning, but it was like, when is 10 minutes going to be up? It was almost like there's part of me wanting to get it over with so I could check the box. So I'm going to do it again where I'm not like focused on the time, and I'll know when it's over.
Me too. I'll make a commitment to doing one more 10-minute stretch sometime between now and dinner.
With the pandemic, and kind of this positive intervention telling us to slow down, I'll speak for myself. I had to slow down in the month of January as a result. And it was really hard for me because I didn't really know what to do with myself because I'm always like the Energizer bunny, go, go, go. I don't slow down. If I slow down too much, then I might not be able to accomplish what I need to accomplish. And so this positive intervention for me is one that I've done before, but I did work on my 10 minutes today. And so far I've gotten 2 of those under my belt, and it was complete and total silence. And it was one time I was like, well, I could do this for another 2 minutes. So I actually did 12 minutes, and it was a gift to myself. So
awesome.
Yeah, so it was a good thing for sure. Dan, can you tell our listeners what's the best way or where they can order your books?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can go to my website, dangriffin.com, and it's FFIN. You can go to my website. You can buy my books on Amazon or go directly to the publisher, like Dr. Powers was talking about, Central Recovery Press or Hazelden, or Josie Bass for the curriculum. That's the best way to get a hold of me, or just email me, dan@dangriffin.com. I respond to direct emails very happily.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dan, for being on Positive Recovery MD. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Yes. And everyone, I hope you enjoyed it as much as Julie and I did. And we'll be signing off until next time. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to get your daily positive intervention sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4SOBRIETY, which is 877-476-2743. We are here to help.